Good evening, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. I do have a pretty exciting announcement. We're going to get a little facelift once again in the studio, probably coming in about a month or so, and I'm pretty excited about that. I think we'll be able to position everything pretty good and kind of take off on the next generation of the Passball Show, which I compare the Passball Show to that bad penny that you seem to keep looking at in your pocket, and you throw it away. You throw it down the road, you throw it in the garbage, you throw it into the ocean, and for some reason you keep looking in your pocket, and it's there. And the bottom line is the Passball Show is going to be with you, as long as I'm on this earth. So it's one of those things that, for those of you who tune in, great. For those of you that see it's around and try to figure out why it's still going, it's the bad penny. It's just never going away. A couple things we're going to hit on today. Like I said, it's pretty cool. We're going to have a little bit of a different setup within about a month or so. I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to talk a little bit of baseball, which we have spoken about over the last couple days. We do want to get into some of the stuff going on in the NBA, the NHL. I feel the Toronto Raptors, if they are looking to fire their head coach, it's going to be a big mistake. We got the Washington Capitals making it to the Eastern Conference Finals in the NHL, finally getting over the hump, finally beating those mighty Pittsburgh Penguins, the team that just seems to, for whatever reason, have their number every single year. And obviously you got the Las Vegas Golden Knights on the other side. Pretty exciting to see an expansion team. Could they make it to the Stanley Cup Finals? Could they potentially win a Stanley Cup in their first season? It was something we spoke about on Monday's show. We'll touch on that again. But, the unfortunate thing that we're going to have to start with, and I promise I'm not going to take a lot of your time with this, my take on what the New York Mets are about right now. And there's really one way that I could summarize it. And for all those that are diehard New York Mets fans and are looking forward to a long season as we get into Memorial Day weekend in the months of June and July and August and hopefully meaningful games in September, this is what I have to say to you. This is the state of the 2018 New York Mets right now.
So far, Halloween's a bigger letdown than being...
And if that doesn't summarize it enough, here's the typical joke that I hear every year from courtesy of Family Guy.
A Mets fan.
Opening day, and here's the first pitch, and the season's over.
As the team sits right now, they've lost right now 17 of their last 23 games. They had an 11-1 start, which I said during the time when they were winning these games, a lot of 1- and 2-run games, that this may be the best run that they have during the whole season. And this was something that was very hard to sustain over the course of 162 games. And of course, since then, the Mets have dealt with some injuries, just like they have every other year. But the problem I thought was with what I was seeing is I wasn't seeing a typical 11-1 team. I wasn't seeing a team that was blowing out their opponents, that seemed like they were the better team on the field every single game that they played. So as you look at the team, unfortunately, where it sits right now, it has come back to the curve and pretty much is what it should be expected to be right now. And I hate to say it because I thought the team was a little bit better than what we've seen over the last 2-3 weeks. And it still, as time goes by, may turn out to be a tad bit better. and maybe closer to that 84-win team that I projected that it would be as the season came to a start. So, the unfortunate thing, as you get ready for a long season, and think about it, through the eyes of a Cincinnati Reds fan, or perhaps a Baltimore Orioles fan. Fans of teams that are off to really bad starts and even worse starts than the New York Mets are. Let's be honest. The Mets record as it sits right now, a game over 500, is a little bit of a mirage. This was a team that had an 11-1 start and played baseball that was really unsustainable at the pace that they were playing at, and has come back to the curve of what it really is. The Baltimore Orioles, they're off to a terrible start. They're sitting there at 8-27. You look at where the other teams that have struggled to this point, the Cincinnati Reds, who the Mets have played 3 games in Cincinnati. And let's be honest, you look at the 2 teams that were playing on the field. The Mets didn't seem like a superior team to the Cincinnati Reds. I mean, they looked like they were peers. The Cincinnati Reds, the way they're constructed outside of Joey Votto, are a typical AAA team. They do not have players that would be playing regularly at the major league level for another team. And they were playing the Mets over these last 3 games, and I know the Mets scored some runs on Monday. The last 2 games they scored 3 runs against a team with an ERA that was well above 5. Pitchers that were pitching with 7 and 5 ERAs. When if you took the uniforms off and said the teams off and just judged the play that you saw on the field, you wouldn't be able to tell which team was the Cincinnati Reds and which team was the New York Mets, which has got to be scary. It's unfortunate that the team that got off to such a good start has had such a quick fall from grace. But you have to, sometimes, you are what you really are. Now, the Mets may be worse than an 18-17 team right now. And we'll see over the next couple weeks. And I do think you got to give this team a little bit of a chance. Hopefully, if Jacob deGrom is healthy, if Yoenis Cespedes is not as hurt as you might think he is, Todd Frazier going on a disabled list is a big blow to that team because they don't have anybody else that can play third base. Adrian Gonzalez hit a couple home runs the other day, may have delayed his day of execution in regards to being DFA'd off this roster. They make the trade of Matt Harvey, but the guy that's replacing him in the starting rotation, Jason Vargas, is not better. If I had a choice of who I would like on my pitching staff, who I thought gave me a better chance to win as a baseball team, I would choose Matt Harvey over Jason Vargas. He has been god-awful. And I understand he won 18 games last year, but if you go back to the All-Star break last year, he has been one of the worst pitchers in all Major League Baseball. He's up there with Matt Harvey. He's up there with Chris Tillman. He's up there with some of the pitchers that ended up finishing last season. Ubaldo Jimenez, who doesn't have a job right now. You can make a case that, none of those pitchers are any worse than Jason Vargas. And it's kind of sad to see. So as this team gets set for the next couple weeks, and they got 3 games in Philadelphia, and I'll tell you, if I'm the Philadelphia Phillies, I'm licking my chops, knowing I got a 3-game series at home. We're playing better baseball, and there's a good chance to stick it to the Mets here, and the Mets who have had the Phillies number over the last couple of years, all of that gets pushed by the wayside. The Phillies have a chance to kind of have their coming out party. This is a good young team that has spent time rebuilding. Has had a couple bad years, has a lot of promise, a lot of hope. With Jake Arrieta and Carlos Santana coming over, it looks like they've added some veterans. This is a team that I think is going to be pretty poised to stick it to the Mets this weekend. And I tell you, over the next couple of weeks, the Mets are going to, have some soul searching and figure out what kind of team they envision themselves going forward. Because there's a couple ways they can look at it. They could try to play it out, try to win as many games as they can, and get themselves in the best position to maybe succeed in the future. And the future would be 2019 and beyond. Or maybe they got to consider completely ripping this thing down. And I wouldn't do it. It wouldn't be my choice. But it's unfortunate that it's something that has to be spoken about. And will probably in a couple weeks if the Mets don't get any better. And I'll tell you, but if you're trying to get any indications of what you see on the field that's going to make you more confident that things are going to be better off in the near future, I don't know what you're really looking at. Yeah, Steven Matz pitched a good game on Saturday. Zach Wheeler pitched okay today. His numbers were better than his outing. He labored, especially in the fifth and sixth innings. Can the Mets get that third and fourth starter to kind of stand up and make a difference in their rotation? I don't think they can. I'm concerned. And I tell you, as we get towards Memorial Day weekend and into June, if this thing isn't getting any better, you're going to start to have to look in a mirror and figure out exactly what this team is. Are you better by letting Adrian Gonzalez and Jose Reyes go? I would say okay. But, who's really coming over here that's going to give you a better chance to win? Dominic Smith is struggling in AAA. Luis Guillaume, was a shortstop prospect, probably one of the Mets' top 5 prospects. Sure, he may get a little chance to play here and there, but I don't know how much of the future he is for the New York Mets. I can't envision him being in a lineup of a Mets team that is making a push to get to October and play baseball in the playoffs. I'm going to lay off the Mets for a while, and hopefully the next time I talk about them, it'll be in a little bit of a better light. But obviously you got a team across town, in the Bronx, that's the best team in baseball right now. And I tell you, it doesn't have anything to do with the guy that's behind the dugout. And this is the next segment that I'm going to kind of get into. We talk about teams that do well. And, it's a 100% guarantee that any team that wins, any team that does well, automatically has a good manager. And, I've always talked about baseball, how it's different from other sports, because coaching in the NFL is very important. And it's not necessarily the head coach. Sometimes you could have a head coach that's not very good, but can surround himself with very good, assistants, whether on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, and they can still succeed. In the end, yes, there's some moments where a head coach has to be good. He has to manage the clock well. He has to manage his players well as far as bringing people in and taking people out. You look at the NBA, and it's very much judged by the head coach. He either has a positive impact on his team or a negative impact on the team. And obviously the NBA is run by its stars. The stars are the ones that are making, the calls over whether the coaches should stay or not. LeBron James basically firing David Blatt while the guy's doing nothing but winning. And you got the NHL, which is very much an X's and O's sport. The coaching is extremely important. And that's why you see so many coaching changes in the NHL, because it's not just about winning, but it's about the impact that the head coach is having on the team. Whether that coach is putting together a good game plan, whether the players are responding to the coach's style. That's why coaching in the NHL is so important, and that's why, like I just said, so many head coaches get fired in the NHL and replaced mid-season. But in baseball, it is different. Because, the analytics as they exist, whether they come from the front office, whether they come from an individual staff, maybe there are people kind of in between the front office and the coaching staff that are relaying information. There are teams that play a game a certain way. A certain batter comes up and, the spray charts say that you play your defenders in this position. So I don't care who you are as a manager, whether you're Mike Scioscia, whether you're, Bruce Bochy, whether you're, Joe Girardi, or, you could be John McGraw or Billy Martin or Leo DeRocher for all I care. That manager is not changing that defensive alignment. The game is set out for you to play it a certain way. And that manager that's sitting there is just holding a clipboard. He's just putting together the lineup. He's conferring with his pitching coach and his analytics staff over when he's going to make a pitching change. So as fans, we always overdo it. And we overdo it more in baseball than other sports, because I believe in other sports, the coaching is a lot more of an indication of the play that you see. And you look at 2 managers in New York right now, and the easiest thing to say, if you're a fan, is that Aaron Boone is a great manager and Mickey Callaway stinks as a manager. And obviously you could go back to today with, the Mets getting their batting order screwed up. and a couple guys come up in a big spot that you think somebody else should be batting. And obviously, it's easier when your team is losing to put the manager under a microscope. But what makes Aaron Boone a great manager? The New York Yankees have won 16 of their last 17 games. And does that automatically mean that Aaron Boone's got it? And Aaron Boone is going to be one of the better managers in Major League Baseball, that he's going to succeed in New York in this environment with this group of players for a very long time? I don't think it means anything. I think if you wanted to point to the talent that exists on the New York Yankees, with Aaron Judge and Didi Gregorius, and obviously at some point Giancarlo Stanton's going to start hitting, Gary Sanchez is going to start hitting, Luis Severino is one of the best pitchers in all of Major League Baseball right now, and we all know about the bullpen. So the Yankees are very well equipped to be a good baseball team for a long time. And you know what? I could be sitting behind the New York Yankees bench, and the Yankees would still be winning as many games right now. So if you're going to make a judgment on Aaron Boone and say that, wow, first month plus, he's getting an A+ review from me because the Yankees are doing nothing but winning. It seems like the Yankees can't lose a game if they try right now. And is that automatically an indication of the manager? Let's see what the Yankees are when they run into a 5-game losing streak, which, there's no way that they're going to be stopped from, going to the postseason, probably winning the American League East. If not, it's going to be a very close race between them and the Boston Red Sox. You're looking at two teams that are certainly going to win 95-plus games. But are we automatically going to anoint Aaron Boone as one of the greatest managers in New York Yankees history just because he's managing a really good team? I tell you, there should have been a line at the door for that vacant New York Yankees managerial job after Joe Girardi got fired. And I'm sure the Yankees and Brian Cashman and Randy Levine and the Steinbrenners probably received calls from so many different people that were like, you know what? I'd like to manage this team. And I'm sure if you polled the 6 new managers in Major League Baseball, Alex Cora, Mickey Callaway, Boone, Ron Gardenhire, Gabe Kapler, and Davey Martinez, I'm sure if you asked them all individually off the record, they would have preferred the Yankees job over the job that they ended up getting. So, Major League Baseball managers are overrated. They are. Because they're only as good as the talent that's assembled around them. Now, I believe that the game has changed. And obviously there's so many things that point to that. I could go in so many different directions here, but I'm talking about the value of a Major League manager. 20 years ago, yes, I think a Major League manager could have made more of a difference than they do right now. 30 years ago, certainly. Going into the series of 50 and 60 years ago, absolutely. Because the Major League manager 50, 60 years ago was essentially the general manager, was essentially making decisions in regards to the personnel and the players that were on that team. So if that team didn't win, you know what? It was on the manager because he picked the players. Now a manager is one in a chain of many different people that are involved in the operations of a baseball team. And yes, he wears the uniform. He goes out there. He gives the lineup card to the umpire every day. He can make the decision whether he wants to challenge a certain play, whether he likes or doesn't like. He wants to go to replay. It's fine. But outside of that, he doesn't have very much control over what is happening in the game. Even his pitching changes, no matter who the manager is, they're being made for him. Pitcher comes out after X amount of pitches. Pitchers, in some cases, come out before they can face the batting order for the 3rd time. And you know what? This is your long guy. He comes in a 3rd or 4th or 5th inning. This guy comes in a 6th or 7th. You may go to one of these other guys as a specialist in a 6th or 7th inning. This guy is your 8th inning guy, and this guy is your closer. You don't even need a manager to make those decisions because those decisions are made for you already. So, when we're going in whatever direction it is, the Phillies fans who are booing Gabe Kapler on opening day in Philadelphia, all of a sudden, he's not so bad, right? You want a manager that is going to get a good pulse of the players. You want the players to play hard for you. That's one of the things that hasn't changed in the last 20 years. You find in certain spots where the players give up or a manager may be a little too aggressive, may not reach his players, things don't go right and the players throw up their hands and quit, yeah, you know what? That's probably when you want to start thinking about changing your manager. It's not necessarily about wins or losses, it's about effort. But, you look at what's going on in Baltimore. Buck Showalter's been one of the better managers of this generation. And his team is sitting there looking like one of the worst teams in baseball in recent memory. And the Baltimore Orioles were not expected to be that bad. Cincinnati Reds fired Brian Price after a 3-15 start. Jim Riggleman, who is probably the the most notable interim manager in all of baseball history, is going to monitor what's going on here. He's going to hold the place for the next guy that's going to come in there. And if I'm Cincinnati, I tell you really got to consider bringing fan favorite Barry Larkin back. And not just because he's beloved in Cincinnati, but because he's an extremely smart guy. And you know what? If you're making a transition from a bad team to eventually being somewhat good, he'd be the perfect guy to put in there. But, one of the things that I always want to point to, because, this is something that, if I ever wanted to accentuate the point that I'm making about Major League managers being overrated, you can look at what happened with the Houston Astros. And the Houston Astros started their rebuild around 2010, 2011. Brad Mills was the manager, the longtime bench coach for Terry Francona with the Boston Red Sox. He took over a team that, was going to look a lot worse in a year than it did. There were players there that once Brad Mills took that job knew we're not going to be with that team for very long. And the Houston Astros invested a lot in their scouting and development, brought in Jeff Luhnow and his staff, and over a series of years developed some younger players, but also took advantage of being very bad, having a couple 100-loss seasons and having a couple number one overall draft picks. Drafting Carlos Correa and Alex Bregman, and guys of that echelon, George Springer. And over time, as these guys developed and came up to the major leagues, they got a lot better. But they made a decision to part ways with Brad Mills, kind of partially through the process. And they brought in Bo Porter. Bo Porter is a very good baseball man. This is a guy that knows the game inside and out. He understands analytics. He understands people. He's a guy that, somewhere along the lines will be a major league manager again, and I promise you will be successful. So he's managing the Houston Astros for a couple of years. Team's not getting any better, but they're starting to see some of the fruits of their investments. They're starting to see some of their younger players come up to the major league level and get their opportunity to play. Houston Astros make a decision. Sorry about that. My throat got a little caught up there. But the Astros make a decision to part ways with Bo Porter through this rebuild. As the team is progressing and getting a little better, still probably another full year away. They end up, going to Tom Lawless as an interim manager and end up in the offseason hiring A.J. Hinch. Now, A.J. Hinch is another well-respected baseball man, but a guy who was brought into the Arizona Diamondbacks in a similar situation and fell flat on his face. So the reviews of A.J. Hinch as a major league manager were not good at all. So, you look at Bo Porter, who I believe could become another A.J. Hinch somewhere around the road. The Astros deciding, based off of maybe wins or losses or clubhouse chemistry or the way that they felt that Bo Porter was getting his message to the players, that it was time to move on. And they bring in a guy in A.J. Hinch to take over the team. The Astros have some good seasons. They get to the playoffs. They win the World Series last year. And all of a sudden, everybody looks at A.J. Hinch, and they consider him one of the best managers in all of Major League Baseball. Well, the only reason that he's considered one of the best managers in all of Major League Baseball is because the Houston Astros won the World Series last year, and the Houston Astros are a pretty good friggin' baseball team. Nobody was saying that about A.J. Hinch when, he couldn't win a ball game when he was managing the Arizona Diamondbacks. When the Arizona Diamondbacks ownership made the decision to fire general manager Josh Burns and Hinch and bring in Kirk Gibson and go in a different direction, nobody was saying that the Diamondbacks made a big mistake. So, the point being, Did A.J. Hinch not know what he was doing with the Arizona Diamondbacks and all of a sudden become a great manager with the Houston Astros? No. Baseball is about wins and losses. Managers in a game are judged by whether the team wins or the team loses. Right now, Aaron Boone looks like a great manager because the Yankees can't lose a game. The Mets have lost 17 of their last 23, so you would say that Mickey Callaway is a terrible Major League manager. You're judged by wins and losses. And a manager, his value and what he's there to do is completely different than what his responsibility used to be 20 years ago and longer. So, as long as a Mickey Callaway or let's say a Ron Gardenhire with the Detroit Tigers, who are expectedly off to a bad start as well, as long as they got a pulse of that team, as long as those players are still playing hard for them, they should get a chance to continue to manage over a series of years. Now, Aaron Boone, conversely, and you could say Gabe Kapler, you could say Davey Martinez, you can even put Callaway into this conversation. You know, these teams could have winning records. These teams could do well over a series of time. But if, conversely to what I said before, if they don't have a good pulse of their players, if the players do not play hard for them, and, you know, even if they're winning, odds are they're not going to last. So what us as the fans and people in the media are judging managers in Major League Baseball off of are wins and losses. What we really should be judging them on is the pulse of the team. First of all, what kind of team did they inherit? How good is this team? Are they underachieving? Or are they just bad? And if they're just bad, are they playing hard? The guys that are out there in the lineup having the opportunity to be on a 25-man roster, are they giving it everything they got? Are they just not as good as their opposition? And are they still, giving the best of effort? If they are, then that's a positive for your manager. If not, then maybe you made a mistake. Once again, this is John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Feel free to comment if you want on Periscope or Facebook Live. Lots of stuff going on in the world of sports. Of course, you got the Yankees playing the Red Sox. These next two games, I got to be honest, if you're a baseball fan, you should watch them. Because you're really looking at two of the better teams in baseball going head-to-head. And, listen, I don't think if, the Red Sox or the Yankees win the next two games, I don't think it's an indication on which one of these teams are better. But I'll tell you, what you're seeing, and if you watched last night, the Yankees-Red Sox game, you're seeing a superior level of baseball being played there. You're seeing two very good teams who have very, very good pitching staffs, certainly top starters, and good bullpens, deep bullpens, lineups that are pretty solid 1 through 9, and even the ability to make a move here and there in game, like the Yankees did yesterday, bringing Neil Walker up to bat for Tyler Austin when Walker ends up coming up with a big hit to start the inning. But it's a superior level of baseball. And you don't get to see it too often. You look at teams like the Astros and, even the team like the Chicago Cubs. They're a pretty good baseball team. They're not off to a good start. They kind of went through the same thing last year. But when, the level of importance of the game picked up, they kicked their game up to the next level. And I expect the Cubs to be good. I expect the Nationals to be good. The Dodgers, I tell you, there's out of one team, out of a series of teams that I picked in what I said was a very top-heavy Major League Baseball coming into the season, they're the one team that has got me the most concerned. And I think a lot of that has to do with the injuries. Clayton Kershaw is on the DL. Corey Seager is out for the year. Justin Turner hasn't played yet this year. Yasiel Puig getting ready to come back from the disabled list. He was hurt for a little while. So the Dodgers may be a little snake bitten. This may be one of those years where just everybody gets hurt. And you know what? In Major League Baseball, when you're on a run, as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show, once again brought to you by JohnPielli.com as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. But, you look at the Dodgers, and I'll tell you, the biggest fear that I had with this team coming into the season was the competition level in that division. I feel really strong about the Rockies. I think they're going to be a very good team. The Diamondbacks, I didn't think were going to go away. The San Francisco Giants, I thought were an above 500 team. Whether I thought they were a playoff team, I was still kind of debating. They kind of came down to my last series of teams that I thought were going to be in the mix for that second wild card. But you're looking at 3 other teams in that division that are ready to play. You know, the Diamondbacks, who have gotten a great spark out of Patrick Corbin. You know, the Rockies have gotten pretty good pitching this year, and obviously you know about their offense. And the Giants, who, in spite of not having Madison Bumgarner, in spite of him being out for a considerable period of time, seem to have the tools to be able to compete. So the Dodgers, I felt, could lose games to them. Now that they're dealing with injuries, they're in a tough spot. And this is a good opportunity for the Arizona Diamondbacks, a very good opportunity for the Colorado Rockies and even the Giants to make their mark right now. Go out there, win some games, you know, maybe separate themselves from the Dodgers who are struggling. And maybe make it about the Dodgers having to catch up to you for a change. Because what the Dodgers have done, particularly last year, remember that stretch they were on, where they had that 50-game stretch where they were like 43-7 or something like that, which doesn't happen in baseball. I mean, no matter what, you go 43-7, teams are going to be chasing you. Now the Rockies and the Diamondbacks and maybe the Giants have a chance to kind of put the shoe on the other foot and see what it's like for the Dodgers to come back and chase them. But moving on, I did want to talk a little NBA right now. And, you know, we always see this happen. And I was kind of frustrated at the end of the baseball season when, you know, the Yankees decided to part ways from Joe Girardi after going within a game of getting to the World Series. You know, the Washington Nationals deciding to do the same with Dusty Baker after he was only there for 2 seasons. And you look at the Toronto Raptors. And the Toronto Raptors, listen, I believe they're a good team. But I never got the impression that this was a team that was going to be able to win an NBA championship. And tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, if you believe that, you know, give me your reasons why. You know, this was a team that had the best record in the Eastern Conference. Certainly was able to take advantage of a couple variables that existed in its own conference. The Boston Celtics, who got off to a good start, but they dealt with some very devastating injuries. First to Gordon Hayward on the first game of the season, and then to Kyrie Irving, you know, not having him for a considerable part of the second half of the season. You had the Cleveland Cavaliers, who spent this whole season in turmoil. This team that was essentially assembled by LeBron James with Dwayne Wade, and you know, we tend to forget that Derrick Rose was on that team. You're looking at a series of players that just never clicked. They were like the 1992 New York Mets, the worst team money can buy. It was an assemblance of stars that were coming from all different areas and wakes and forms and just couldn't put it together as a cohesive unit. So the Cavaliers make all those trades at the trading deadline. They completely overhaul their roster and still never seem to get it together. The Toronto Raptors were able to take advantage of this. The Philadelphia 76ers, it took a little while before they started to gel as a team. Of course, they had that long winning streak at the end of the season. They ended up getting themselves in good shape. But by that point, the Toronto Raptors had built such a substantive lead that it was hard for them to pretty much be caught. So the Toronto Raptors were able to capitalize on a lot of deficiencies that existed within its own conference. So the fact that they were able to win the regular season in the Eastern Conference really didn't mean anything. They still had to go up against the likes of the top teams in that conference. And whether they ended up matching themselves up eventually with the Cavaliers, which they did, or the Celtics or the 76ers, you look at roster up and down, and I would say those were 3 superior teams to the Toronto Raptors. So they did the best that they could. They won the Eastern Conference with the record that they had. But at some point, we're going to be shown the door in the NBA playoffs. It just happened to be in 4 straight games to the Cleveland Cavaliers in the second round. So maybe from within the organization, there was expectations that the Raptors should have gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals. And in order to do that, they would have had to find some way to beat LeBron James, who, by the way, has single-handedly had the Toronto Raptors number over the last 3 seasons. I don't know if it's the players that are on the court for the Toronto Raptors that are starstruck and just look at this guy and it's like, wow, this guy is so much better than him. It's kind of like the Knicks of the 1990s facing Michael Jordan. They're like, oh my God, it's Michael Jordan. You just can't beat him. He's just that much better than us. But if the Raptors decide to part ways with Dwane Casey as their head coach, they'll be making a terrible mistake. This is a guy that was just voted by his peers as the best coach in the NBA. Now, I don't think he is the best coach in the NBA. I still think that belongs to Greg Popovich. I think Eric Spoelstra certainly deserves some consideration, but obviously Brad Stevens with the Boston Celtics. So there's guys out there. Steve Kerr gets a lot of credit as a good head coach for the Golden State Warriors, but he's blessed with the best talent. He's blessed with the best series of players that the sport has. So it's kind of hard to say this guy is the best coach when he has the best players. But Dwane Casey has done a lot more with a lot less. He's got a good team, but he certainly doesn't have a great team. And if I'm looking to build this team forward and trying to make those little tweaks to say, what do we have to do to make the Toronto Raptors a better team going forward? I would certainly want this guy to be the head coach of the team plus whatever it ends up adding. And the last reason, and it will be a terrible mistake, is what exists out there in the NBA? I mean, where is that top assistant? Where is that top college coach that you're going to pry and bring over and take your team to the next level? Because all that exists in the NBA is a series of retreads. Look at the New York Knicks. They hired David Fizdale. David Fizdale, I would bet is probably a pretty good coach. He was a very good assistant in those Miami Heat teams that ended up, getting to the finals and winning a couple championships. He got an opportunity with Memphis, which only lasted a little over a year, and he had a winning record. So based off of what's out there, I would say he's a pretty good choice. But there's nothing that excites me about David Fizdale that says, you know what, I'm glad the Knicks hired him because he's the guy that's going to take this team to the next level. First of all, they don't have the players. But second of all, what kind of track record does David Fizdale have that makes you think that he is going to get the most out of these players that exist with the New York Knicks? Because that's exactly what Dwane Casey has done with the Toronto Raptors. And I know Lowry and DeRozan are very good players. They're probably amongst the top 10, if not in the top 15, amongst the best players in the NBA. And if you wanted to really be critical, maybe in the top 20. But there's certainly two very good players in the NBA. And they're good to build your team around. But if I'm looking to get the team like the Toronto Raptors to the next level, get them past, being the number one seed in the Eastern Conference and losing in the second round, I would think Dwane Casey gives you as good of a chance as anybody. And if not, who is that guy? Where is he? What retread head coach in the NBA is going to come over to the Toronto Raptors and make them that much of a better basketball team? That's what I want to know. And I tell you, sometimes you got to deal with the emotions of your season ending, and that's exactly what the New York Yankees did with Joe Girardi. That's exactly what the Washington Nationals did when they decided to part ways with Dusty Baker. Sometimes you get caught up in the emotion of how you lost. And for the Washington Nationals, it was they can't get past that first round. They can't get past the Dodgers or the Cardinals in past years. And sometimes it's a little bit emotional when you end up making that decision. But that's why you got to wait. That's why you got to give it a little bit of time. Let the dust settle. And after the dust settles, try to figure out where you are as a franchise. What do you have to do to get better? And then evaluate what the value of the coach has been over the last couple of years. Because if the Toronto Raptors do that, cooler heads will prevail. And they'll keep Dwane Casey there as the head coach. If they make a rash decision, I tell you, you're not going to find another guy that's going to get more out of that team than Dwane Casey has over the last couple seasons. The problem isn't coaching. The problem is they have inferior talent to the other teams in the NBA. They're not up there with the Golden State Warriors. And if for some reason things worked out in a perfect way and the Toronto Raptors made it to the NBA Finals, they would not have a chance to win a game in a series against the Golden State Warriors. So the Toronto Raptors should do their due diligence, should evaluate everything that exists in their organization from top to bottom, from front office to coaching staff to players. And hopefully they decide that they need to add a little more talent. They need to find somebody that can join their team and give them a better chance to beat LeBron James, no matter what team James is playing for next year. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Once again, comment on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed if you like. I'll engage in whatever type of conversation you want. Feel free to troll if you want, because I'll put you in your place right as well. Last thing I wanted to talk about, you got the, Stanley Cup Finals coming up eventually. You got the Conference Finals, of course. Washington Capitals finally getting over the hump, beating the Pittsburgh Penguins. Sometimes you see something that happens and you're like, you know what? I'm starting to believe that this may be their year. And I look back at the Chicago Cubs in Major League Baseball in 2016. And I watched them lose in the National League Championship Series to the Mets a year before. And I watched the team kind of grow. And I watched as they accelerated through the playoffs of 2016. And finally beat the Dodgers, ended up going to the World Series. And you started to feel like this was going to finally be their year. And you felt when the Chicago Cubs finally made it to a World Series, which, by the way, they hadn't been to a World Series, in 2016 before that, since 1945. You felt like when they got to a World Series, they were going to finally win it. And the Washington Capitals were going through something similar, obviously something nowhere near as bad and as long and as drawn out as the Chicago Cubs went through between championships. But, the Capitals were battling against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it seemed like every year the Penguins had their number. And pretty similar to what I just said, Toronto Raptors can't get past the Cleveland Cavaliers. The New York Knicks couldn't get past Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And finally, Alex Ovechkin and Holtby and the rest of that Capital team celebrates a series win against the Pittsburgh Penguins. The two-time defending Stanley Cup champions are going home, and the Capitals are moving on. They're getting set to play the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tampa Bay Lightning have won, a couple Stanley Cups as well. They're a pretty good team. If you're a New York Rangers fan, you're obviously familiar with a lot of players on the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I look at the Capitals, and I think if they could get past the Penguins, they could get by anybody. I wouldn't be surprised to see them finally winning the Stanley Cup this year. And we spoke about on Monday the other, improbable thing that we've seen in the NHL is the expansion Las Vegas Golden Knights, a team that struggled to get a team in Las Vegas for a series of years. But they finally did, and they took advantage of a draft system and an ability to tool their team up pretty quickly and got themselves in a position where they were good right away. Not only were they good right away, they were one of the better teams in the Western Conference. And they've just gotten themselves into the Western Conference Finals, where they'll play the winner of Nashville and Winnipeg. Nashville looked like the best team coming out of their conference. They're going to have to gut out a 7-game series win if they're going to make it to the conference finals. The Vegas Golden Knights are already there. And they may have a chance to play Winnipeg, which I believe is not as good of a team as Nashville. Now, Winnipeg could beat them in one game, and they beat them in 3 out of 6 games, so they've shown they can certainly compete with the Nashville Predators. But I look at Nashville, and I think they're a little bit of a better team. Well, and we'll find out in Game 7. But I think that, if you look at the Las Vegas Golden Knights, they have just as good of a chance as any of those other two teams, either Nashville or Winnipeg, to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. And if I want to go towards something where I'm rooting for and I'd like to see a Capital Golden Knights Finals. To see Washington finally get over the hump and get themselves there. And something that we've never seen in the history of professional sports. And that's an expansion team get to its respective league championship and have a chance to win the whole thing in their first year. And we spoke about on Monday the possibility if the Vegas Golden Knights do this. I think it's very well going to impact expansion in Major League Baseball. because Commissioner Rob Manfred looks like he is just about hell-bent on adding 2 more teams to this league. And think about it. When you're a commissioner, you want to have things that you're remembered for. Bud Selig had a series of things that he was remembered for, both good and bad. But Rob Manfred wants to talk about pace of play. He wants to speed up the game, and maybe he'll be able to accomplish that. But he also wants to bring 2 more teams in the league. And when his reign is over as the commissioner of Major League Baseball, he wants to be remembered for adding 2 more teams and getting to 32 teams in Major League Baseball. Whether that means there's going to be a team in Las Vegas or a team in Montreal or a team in Portland or a team in Nashville, whatever, there's going to be 2 more teams in Major League Baseball. So that being said, you know, it's going to impact the way, if you watch what the Vegas Golden Knights have done, the way one of these 2 teams may choose to run its new franchise. And because of that, you're probably going to see one team that's going to go the old sabermetric route, the one that's going to go try to build through the draft, try to be bad for a little while and know when they finally get things together that they're going to be very good. And you're going to get another team that's going to say, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of this draft, the expansion draft. I'm going to draft the best players that I possibly can that are going to put the team in the best position to compete right away. And I'm going to make a run in that first season. And I'm going to go through free agency. And I'm going to say, hey, you know what? If I could, you know, if I could up my payroll, which, by the way, the payroll is going to start out at 0, I'm going to go after the top free agents. I'm going to make, you know, the right moves in regards to the expansion draft to draft veteran players and teams that I know are going to make an impact right away. And I'm going to see if I could win, or if I'm going to see if I could get my team in the postseason in the first year. And it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. But I promise you, what's happening in the NHL right now with the Vegas Golden Knights is going to impact how one of these other teams in Major League Baseball, that 31st or 32nd team, whether it's in Las Vegas, whether it's in Nashville, whether it's in Montreal or Portland, and I'm almost sure, outside of the possibility of maybe Charlotte or Oklahoma City, I'm pretty sure that the 2 teams are going to come down to those 4 cities. Vegas, Nashville, Portland, and of course Montreal. But I'm thinking about, you know, in my lifetime, will I ever see a team win a championship in its first season? And there's some people that it doesn't appeal to, and I understand it. I understand if you're a diehard hockey fan. If you go back and let's say you're a Rangers fan or you're a fan of whatever one of the original 6 that you are, and you think of the pride, and you think of what hockey means to you, and the history of the game, and what it was like when players didn't use helmets, what it was like when goalies didn't have equipment on, and you're talking about being a traditionalist as a sports fan, I'd understand why you wouldn't want to see a team come in its first season and win the Stanley Cup. And certainly if you're a fan of a team that you've rooted for a long time and you haven't seen your team win a Stanley Cup in a long time, it'll kind of be a little bit of a slap in the face to see this team just assembling itself on the street, going out there, winning a Stanley Cup in its first year. I think that would be fascinating. Because you know what? It'll be something that you may never see again. But it also may impact the way other teams choose to run their franchises. And it may tell that team that has been sitting there for the last 10 years on their asses, thinking about stinking and having a terrible season and doing bad for a couple seasons so they can get some good draft picks, to get off their behind and work on getting some good players that are playing at the highest level. Not players in the minor leagues. Not good draft picks that you can brag about and say this guy's going to be good in 5 years. Because we watched it in sports, and I tell you, it really is taking the entertainment out of sports. You're seeing it happen a lot in baseball, but it's happened a lot in the NBA and the NHL. Not so much in football. Football, you have a lot more power. You can build yourself through the draft and be good within a couple of years. The drafts you have in football are players that are going to be impact players right away. The NBA, you may add a player or 2. The NHL, you may add a player or 2. but it's still going to take a little bit of time. You're not going to go from 20 wins in the NBA to 60 wins in one season unless you go through free agency and bring in some top free agents. You could draft, the next LeBron James, but you got to surround him with somebody else that's going to be able to compete with the stars of other teams. But football, of course, it's different. But I tell you, if you look at what's going on in baseball and teams that are having this race to the bottom, like Scott Boras said, the battle for the basement, the battle to get that number one pick, there aren't hundreds of good baseball players that get drafted every year. Like Mike Trout, and Aaron Judge, guys get drafted in the latter part of the first round. They weren't drafted by bad teams. The Yankees and the Angels didn't, try to stink for a series of years so they could get those guys. There's different ways to do it. And the problem is a lot of the minds in baseball seem to be set on this formula that there's only one way to do it. And I'd like to see a team like the Dodgers, who've had a good balance of obviously being able to spend as much money as they've wanted to, but they use analytics. They're one of the most analytically driven teams in all Major League Baseball, but they've also drafted well. I mean, you see guys named Bellinger and Seager. Kershaw was a guy that they drafted and brought in themselves. So you could do it both ways. You could bring in players from other organizations, have a good farm system, and develop and sign and draft your own players. You don't have to lose 100 games in baseball to become a good team over the next series of years. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 6 to 7 p.m. We're going to cut it a little early today because I'm headed over to the batting cages. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. We'll talk about everything going on in your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. I'll be back with you 6 p.m. tomorrow. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.